Om. Om. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavai Tejasvina Vaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May the Divine Being look over us lovingly as a mother and father. May the Divine Being support and nourish us as a mother and father. May we have the strength and skill to study together the art of spirituality. May no misunderstandings arise amongst us. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. So good evening and welcome to Chapter 6 of Swami Vivekananda's Jnana Yoga. Chapter 6 is titled The Absolute and Manifestation. It was delivered in London in 1896. And before we go ahead, are there any questions or comments left over from the end of the session last Wednesday? Anything at all that people, this was the Swami's summation of how we can, by our efforts and by the way the process works of spiritual awakening, we can make Maya no longer a Tantalus as hell, a prison, but something of joy and celebration. And it is by the realization of the self that occurs. So anything left from last week, or from the previous weeks for that matter, about the definition of Maya and how to no longer be mastered by Maya, but become one with that which is the mastery or master of Maya. All right. The absolute and manifestation. The one question that is most difficult to grasp in understanding the Advaita philosophy, and the one question that will be asked again and again, and that will always remain, is how has the infinite, the absolute, become the finite? Now, that is a question that I'm sure has arisen in all of our minds as we pursue this. How is this possible? How can the formless, the eternal, the infinite, the changeless take name and form, become the relative, the changing? So, the one question that is most difficult to grasp in understanding the Advaita philosophy And the one question that will be asked again and again, and that will always remain, is, how has the infinite, the absolute, become the finite? I will now take up this question, and in order to illustrate it, I will use a figure. Obviously, I can't show you the figure. It's a simple one. You'll grasp what he's getting at. Here is the absolute, A, and this is the universe, B. The absolute is above, the universe is below B. The absolute has become the universe. By this is not only meant the material world, but the mental world, the spiritual world, heavens and earths, and in fact, everything that exists. We need to hold in our awareness that word exists as he develops this idea. The absolute has become the universe. By this is not only meant the material world, but the mental world, the spiritual world, heavens and earths, and in fact, everything that exists. What does that mean? Exists is something that has an experiencer, that which is experienced, that's which exists, and the experience of, so it has those three components. That is a definition of that which exists. It is experienced by the experiencer. So we need to keep that in mind as he, Swami, develops this idea. Everything that exists, mind, mental world, mind is the name of a change, and body the name of another change, the material world. So mind is the name of a change, body the name of another change, and so on. And all these changes compose our universe. This absolute has become the universe by coming through time, space, and causation. C. Now, time, space, and causation is a rectangle that surrounds A and B. So A, absolute above, universe B. Time, space, and causation surrounds this, and so it is the universe, by coming through time, space, and causation, through it. This is the central idea of Advaita. Time, space, and causation are like the glass through which the absolute is seen. And when it is seen on the lower side, I'm going to repeat that. Time, space, and causation are like the glass through which the absolute is seen. And when it is seen on the lower side, it appears as the universe. Now we at once gather from this that in the absolute, there is neither time, space, nor causation. The idea of time cannot be there, seeing that there is no mind, no thought. The idea of space cannot be there, seeing that there is no external change. What you call motion and causation cannot exist where there is only one. We have to understand this and impress it on our minds that we call, that what We have to understand this and impress it on our minds, that what we call causation begins after, if we may be permitted to say so, the degeneration of the absolute into the phenomenal, and not before. Causation begins after, if we may be permitted to say so, the degeneration of the absolute into the phenomenal, and not before. That our will, our desire, and all these things always come after that. By degeneration, the Swami means a state in which the gunas are in disequilibrium in terms of the physics that we know, a state of anti-entropy, increasing complexity and specialization. This is degeneration from that manyness, is a degeneration of the state of perfect equilibrium of the gunas, in which there is no manifestation, there is only the one. So that's what he means by degeneration. Doesn't mean anything negative in the sense of bad and good. It just means that in the pure oneness, there is no time, space, and causation, and so there is no suffering. There is no samsara. So, having come this far, are there any comments or questions about what's been said so far about the absolute becoming the relative through the instrumentality of time, space, and causation? Anything at all?
Brother Shankara, this is Rishikesh.
Yes,
Namaste.
yes.
Uh, I have to say, this is too difficult for me to understand. This was, if there is any simple or analogy that you can use or something, and no pressure, if maybe it is something very internal, but I just want to let you know that this was very hard for me to understand this complete.
Well, we've only just begun the talk, so perhaps the Swami will make it more clear. But I certainly understand what you say. That's what the Swami starts with. This is the question that is always asked and will always remain. Why? Because it is such a difficult question. So you're right where you belong, Rishikesh.
Okay.
In not, he says it is so difficult to grasp.
Okay, good. Thanks.
So we're all right there with you. For me to presume to amplify the Swami's words at this point by some metaphor of my own would be like a monkey jumping around on a giant's shoulders. So thank you for that remark, and that is exactly where we all are. Anyone else have anything whatsoever to offer or to ask?
I do have a question here. There, where he says, and the one question that will be asked again and again, and that will always remain. What does he mean by always remain? Is it that we will never come to the understanding or conclusion, or that the question will never cease to exist because
the question will never cease to exist as long as there is a mind to think. our realization is to go beyond time, space, and causation to that state of being, that state of realization, which is beyond existence as such, in which there is no experiencer. He describes it, the Swami describes it very well in the early pages of Raja Yoga, when he says when there is no longer any vritti, question would be a vritti. When there is no longer any vritti in the mind stuff, the chitta, your universe, the universe of time, space, and causation, that you are helping to create, will cease to exist. And something else is there, but it can't be said to exist in the sense that those things that are within time, space, and causation exist. That's why I made a point of that word when we were moving through that point of that part of the talk. Exists means within time, space, and causation. Thank you for that. That was a very appropriate question for right now. What question will always remain and why? As long as there is a mind to think it, that question will remain. How does this occur? I don't know if you can hear it, but there's an emergency vehicle just outside the house here. And there it goes. It's finally going away. Anything else from anyone before we move on?
Brother Shankar, so we too create, because I just heard you, this is Katrina. So
Yes, hello, Katrina.
hi, how are you today?
Better.
That's good. So you just said that we also create time, space, and causation.
Yes. You are the divine being, Katrina. You are the divine being, according to this way of thinking. The great saying of the Upanishads is Tattvamasi, that thou art. Therefore, as that divine being, you are, it was you as that divine being
Okay.
who said, according to the Upanishads again, I am one, undifferentiated, changeless. I am one, I shall become many. And this, what the Swami characterized as degeneration, began. Now, in the Judeo-Christian scriptures, this is given a somewhat pejorative spin, in that somehow there was something wrong in the divine, in the form of Adam and Eve before the so-called fall, that there was something wrong in them wanting to know duality. And so when they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that degeneration was thought of and spoken of and written of as a fall from grace, rather than the more balanced way in which it's handled in Advaita. The Swami speaks of it as a degeneration, but not in a pejorative sense, but just in a factual or scientific sense. When the one becomes many, then it is no longer in that pure undegenerated state. And you being the divine presence, you being the one, and again, this seems unimaginable to us as we sit here, but this is what the scriptures tell us. This is what the great teachers tell us, that we are that which is bringing this about. And it will be by the Swami, not in this lecture, but it will be by the Swami shown how we do that, how we project the universe of name and form. And he talks about it from the Advaita perspective rather than from the Sankhya perspective, that is the one that we see reflected in the Bhagavad Gita. It's,
Brother Shankara?
yes, Swayam.
Yeah, so again, my question may be premature because the answers might be coming, but it seems near impossible to reach to the absolute without, blanking out the universe. And I sort of vaguely
Releasing, rather than say blanking out, dear,
uh
let's say releasing.
releasing.
Okay, but please continue with what you were saying.
No,
I
I was
just
just going
wanted
to
to
say,
I,
I remembered.
blank out is kind of a misleading term in this case.
Okay. Something in the journey to Ishlan, where Carlos Castaneda, there's one particular chapter, I can't recall, but something in the same terms, like it's releasing the universe, but there was some other term
Yes.
uh, used for it.
Well, you and I can talk about that.
Okay.
I'd sooner not deviate into
Okay.
Don Juan's teachings here
Okay.
this evening. They're not parallel.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you, Brother Shankar.
They're congruent, but they're not parallel.
Brother Shankar, this is Rishikesh. Sorry to interrupt. Just one more thought I want to share.
It's not an interruption. That's what we're here for, Rishikesh.
Okay. As that this that paragraph was read, one image that came to my mind was of, and I quickly looked this up on Google. I couldn't remember the Vishwa Swarup of Krishna in Gita / Mahabharata, where the absolute and universe coming together is kind of depicted. I don't know if is there any link there, or I don't know
Well,
why that image came to my mind.
of course, there would be a link in Swami Vivekananda's mind. But again, they're two different tracks, Rishikesh. There are two different tracks. Advaita is not what's reflected in the dualistic teachings of Advaita, of the Mahabharata, and for that matter, the way the Gita is mostly interpreted. It's not in fact a dualistic tract, but it could seem to be.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Brother Shankara,
Yes.
regarding the Sankhya philosophy and
Mm-hmm.
Advaita philosophies, if I can call them such, what, and then Vedanta. Could you just give like a high level differentiation? Because this is the Vedanta Center of Atlanta, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what business is there to discuss Sankhya philosophy if it's not partly related to all of this? I mean, if the Gita is based on it, can you help me understand like how they're related?
If we're going to understand Sri Krishna in the Gita, we have to have at least a rudimentary understanding of the frame of reference from which he spoke, which is Sankhya, which is superficially dualistic.
Superficially.
Superficially.
But at its core, it's not.
Properly and deeply understood, it is not.
Right. Okay.
For exactly the same reasons that the Swami is beginning to explain to us here. Because Sankhya, which Krishna says he propounded, he developed and spoke himself as the sage Kapila, is a kind of science.
Mm-hmm.
It's a kind of, Sankhya means counting or enumeration. And it's a way of saying, how did each of these names and forms come into existence? It's very detailed and very complex. And if you read the counting of the gunas and the three qualities or aspects of which everything is compounded in Sankhya are the three gunas, tamas, rajas, sattva. And each name and form is composed of so much of each. And it'll remind you, if you know Western chemistry, it will remind you of the periodic table. So much of this, so much of that, so much of the other thing equals this, this molecule, this atom. And so it's a way of explaining the nature of reality. And it presumes what seems to be a dualistic frame of reference, in that there is the one, Prakriti, which arises as a natural consequence of Purusha, just as Maya is a natural consequence of Brahman. There's that much of a parallel. And then there's something called the Great Cause, which has a parallel with Advaita or Vedanta's construct of Hiranyagarbha. But then Advaita says that nothing really happened. This is the amazing part, that Vasishta and for that matter Shankara, Adi Shankaracharya, they say that nothing really happened. There's just this dreamlike superimposition of and it is because there is a mind to perceive it. But the mind is what is to be in the extreme, or the greatest teachers of Advaita say the mind is to be annihilated. Shankaracharya doesn't go that far. So now we've crossed the line from Sankhya into Vedanta. Vedanta is what Adi Shankaracharya taught, and Swami Vivekananda called his teachings of the 4 yogas also Vedanta.
Okay.
That was kind of rambling, but I hope it made some sense.
No, that was very helpful. The only remaining question I have is when we talk about the nature of reality,
Mm-hmm.
the word reality, when we say the nature of reality, is that what we're talking about, what we perceive? Is that what we're calling part of Maya? Or are we talking about the ultimate, infinite?
Anytime we're talking about anything or thinking about anything, it is the lower case reality.
Mm-hmm.
Absolute reality cannot be perceived,
Right.
because there is no perceiver there.
Right. Okay.
And it can be realized. And some people, some few, having realized it, are able to come back and teach. Sri Ramakrishna said there are two kinds. The person whose thread of just this slender thread of ego, he referred to as the ego of knowledge. And the other path is of the ego of love. Now, one of the things that Vivekananda pointed out is that Sri Ramakrishna was, in Vivekananda's terms, unique in that he combined both. So anything else from anyone?
Well, Brother Shankara, this is Dennis.
Yes, Dennis.
And it does seem like the Swami has broken this down beautifully, elementally, and simply for us, but it also seems to be super deep into the full stuff as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I just have this feeling that I could read these 2 pages every single day for the next week and take something or some kind of different angle from it. It just,
Boy, howdy,
it
Dennis.
just seems really deep.
Have you hit the nail on the head? That's exactly right. When the Swami says it is difficult to grasp, you have correctly said, I could read it every day for the next, you said, week, 2 weeks, whatever, and take something else from it, because there's so much here. That's why I wanted to pause before we went on, because this introduction is, as you said, deep into the pool stuff, and there is so much here. And the questions and comments that have been made have all been relevant, in that people are trying to get some grasp. So thank you. Yes, you're absolutely right. You could do exactly what you said and take something more and more from it the more you studied it. Swami Vivekananda once remarked that a whole book could be written on any one remark of Sri Ramakrishna. Someone challenged him to prove that and gave him an example of one remark. I won't go into which one it was. And 2 hours later, the guy, Swami started talking. And 2 hours later, the guy said, I get it. You're right. So, anything else from anyone? All right, dears. The Swami goes on. I think Schopenhauer's philosophy makes a mistake in its interpretation of Vedanta, for it seeks to make the will everything. Schopenhauer makes the will stand in place of the absolute. But the absolute cannot be presented as will, for will is something changeable and phenomenal, and over the line drawn and over the line drawn above time, space, and causation. There is no change, no motion. It is only below the line that external motion and internal motion, called thought, begin. So that goes to what you were asking about, Katrina. Schopenhauer thought, okay, since we're making this happen, the will is making this happen, then the will must be it. But the Swami says, no, the will is within time, space, and causation. That which is, that manifests also as will. I will become many, I shall become many. That already posits time, space, and causation. Schopenhauer makes the will stand in place of the absolute, but the absolute cannot be presented as will, for will is something changeable and phenomenal. And over the line, he's pointing to his illustration, and over the line, drawn above time and space, above time, space, and over the line, drawn above time, space, and causation, there is no change, no motion. It is only below the line in universe that external motion and internal motion, called thought, begin. There can be no will on the other side in the absolute, and will therefore cannot be the cause of the universe. Coming nearer, we see in our own bodies that will is not the cause of every movement. I move this chair, my will is the cause of this movement, and this will becomes manifested as, and this will becomes manifested as muscular motion at the other end. But the same power that moves the chair is moving the heart, the lungs, and so on, but not through will. Given that the power is the same, it only becomes will when it rises to the plane of consciousness. And to call it will before it has risen to this plane is a misnomer. This makes a good deal of confusion in Schopenhauer's philosophy. A stone falls and we ask why. This question is possible only on the supposition that nothing happens without a cause. I request you to make this very clear in your minds. For whenever we ask why anything happens, we are taking for granted that everything that happens must have a why. That is to say, it must have been preceded by something else which acted as the cause. This precedence and succession are what we call the law of causation. It means that everything in the universe is by turn a cause and an effect. It is the cause of certain things which come after it, and it is the effect of something else which has preceded it. This is called the law of causation, and it is a necessary condition of all of our thinking. We believe that every particle in the universe, whatever it may be, is in relation to every other particle. There has been much discussion as to how this idea arose. In Europe, there have been intuitive philosophers who believed that it was constitutional in humanity. Others have believed it came from experience, but the question has never been settled. We shall see later on what the Vedanta has to say about it. But first we have to understand this, that the very asking of the question why presupposes that everything around us, everything around us has been preceded by certain things and will be succeeded by certain other things. The other belief involved in this question is that nothing in the universe is independent, that everything is acted upon by something outside itself. Interdependence is the law of the whole universe. In asking what caused the absolute, what an error we are making. To ask this question, we have to suppose that the absolute also is bound by something, that it is dependent on something. And in nothing, and in making this supposition, I'm going to read that again. We have to suppose that the absolute also is bound by something, that it is dependent on something. And in making this supposition, we drag the absolute down to the level of the universe. For in the absolute, there is neither time, space, nor causation. It is all one. That which exists by itself alone cannot have any cause. That which is free cannot have any cause, else it would not be free but bound. That which has relativity cannot be free. Thus we see the very question why the infinite became the finite is an impossible one, for it is self-contradictory. Coming from subtleties to the logic of the common plane or common sense, we can see this from another side, when we seek to know how the absolute has become the relative. Supposing we knew the answer, would the absolute remain the absolute? It would have become relative. What is meant by knowledge in our common sense idea? It is only something that has become limited by our mind, that we know, and when it is beyond our mind, it is not knowledge. Now the absolute becomes limited by the mind. It is no. Now, if the absolute becomes limited by the mind, it is no more absolute. It has become finite. Everything limited by the mind becomes finite. Therefore, to know the absolute is again a contradiction in terms. That is why the question has never been answered, because if it were answered, there would be no more an absolute. A God known is no more a God. He has become finite like one of us. He cannot be known. He is always the unknowable one. But what Advaita says is that God is more than knowable. This is a great fact to learn. You must not go home with the idea that God is unknowable in the sense in which agnostics posit. For instance, here is a chair. It is known to us. But what is beyond either? But what is beyond either, or whether people I'm sorry, just a moment. There's something. There's something wrong here with the text. But what is beyond ether, or whether people exist or not, is possibly unknowable. But God is neither known nor unknowable in this sense. He is something still higher than known. That is what is meant by God being unknown and unknowable. The expression is used in the sense in which it may be said that some questions are unknown and unknowable. God is more than known. This chair is known, but God is intensely more than that, because in and through him we have to know this chair itself. He is the witness, the eternal witness of all knowledge. Whatever we know, we have to know in and through him. He is the essence of our own self. He is the essence of this ego, this I, and we cannot know anything excepting in and through that I. Therefore, you have to know everything in and through the Brahman. To know the chair, you have to know it in and through God. This God is infinitely nearer to us than the chair, but yet he is infinitely higher. Neither known nor unknown, but something infinitely higher than either. He is your own self. Who would live a second? Who would breathe a second in this universe if that blessed one were not filling it? If that blessed one were not filling it. So much has been said now. So much has been said about knowing and not knowing, the mind and the nature of the mind, and so on. The nature of knowing. Before we go on, are there any questions or comments?
I was thinking of what Swamiji said about the will, and what he says about the German philosophers and their interpretation of Vedanta. And he doesn't say it here so much, but I was just thinking of that and how the will is tied to the external world. He says somewhere he says that it's tied to desire, because if, like, the wall in front of me didn't exist, I wouldn't want to break it down, or I wouldn't think about whether I'm going to walk it. I wouldn't have to will myself. But then he also has this one place where he says, it's not like I'm willing the blood in my body to flow through my veins. That's just happening, whether I will it or not. So it's like, it's just wonderful.
It goes, you've hit on this concept of desire. The reason the blood flows in the body is because we desire to have a body. Therefore, that which is has created these action and experience suits in order for us to experience what it wants to experience. The Swami was just talking about the witness. And that is the face of the divine. And we can sit in that witness seat through contemplation, concentration, and the practice of meditation. We come to be in that witness seat, seeing that this play of time, space, and causation going on. And then there's no question about why it arose. It's very clear that it arises and is happening as a result of the fact that the absolute exists. And we are that, and we are watching what we are witnessing that which has arisen from the desire simply for what in the Chandogya Upanishad is called manyness.
But I just think of it is so. I mean, for example, a baby, in a mother's womb.
Mm-hmm.
Was it the mother's will that cell started to reproduce in her womb, that heart started beating? I mean, some of it is will, but then what you just said, I was just thinking of, which was, you had said the blood flows through this body because we desire this body.
Yes. And
but then it's also
we've
sorry.
designed, so we as the divine being designed these action and experience suits.
I had somewhat of a different interpretation of this analogy that he gave. So maybe you guys might be able to shine some light on it. He talks about the same power that moves the chair.
Mm-hmm.
So we are to understand the power that moves the chair is the willpower. I want this chair to move, so I'm going to move it from here to there. That is a thought, right? He compares that to, my interpretation of this is, he compares that to the power that beats our heart, or the energy that allows us to breathe. We're not, as far as I understand, we're not thinking about that. That's not willpower. There's something else there that's doing it. Think about that, right? That's my interpretation of this. And I understand, we've manifested these bodies in this reality that we exist in, and that, but my interpretation was, I thought he was trying to compare and get us to see there's something different between willpower to move an object from here to there, or a desire to want this or that and go after it, versus just breathing. We just breathe, right?
Yes.
Right. No, I was thinking along the same lines, because like with the child in a mother's womb, she could will that she could wish to be pregnant, but you could get pregnant without even wanting to get pregnant. Maybe you don't want to get pregnant. So it's interesting. I do think but then he also says elsewhere that the soul takes up a body, that we are divine, that part of us can, I guess, I don't know, can manufacture. That part of us is God.
Yes. And there is the ability in the mind to witness the involuntary, the breathing, the actions of the prana, in other words, and come to know them intimately, and even to control them. This is chapter 3 of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. But what the Swami is getting at here, as was remarked, is there's a very big difference between the will as manifested as an impulse to move a chair and that more subtle will that produced a body that must necessarily breathe and move the blood around in order to continue to exist. But he struck this note from his objection to Schopenhauer saying that the will is the cause of the absolute becoming the reality that we see. He said Schopenhauer made a mistake in this. Anything else from anyone? This is exactly what we should be doing.
Brother Shankara, this is Katrina again.
Yes, dear.
So if the divine, if God is unknowable and we are made in God's image, does that mean that I can't really know myself? I can only experience God. Since I can't know God, I can only experience.
All right.
God.
Now, knowing, there's two kinds of knowing.
Okay.
There is the knowing within time, space, and causation.
Okay.
Which is, as the Swami points out, inherently a limiting activity.
Okay.
We limit that which we think about, that which we know. And then there is a different kind of knowing, which is called realization. When we still the activities of the mind stuff, I say mind stuff because it exists throughout the body, not just in the brain cavity. When we still the activities of that through prayer, contemplation, concentration, meditation, when that happens, something else becomes evident to us.
Okay.
And it's that knowledge, and it is that that is meant by your being made in God's image. You have that capacity to know or realize in that way.
Okay.
That's the profound understanding, even among the Judeo-Christian saints of what is meant by the differentiation between lower knowledge and this higher knowledge or realization. Because there is no, the mind is the lowercase knower. The witness is the higher case knower. Most of what the witness experiences through our action and experience suits is the lower knowledge. But that witness, which arises in us, has the capacity, as God does, to know unity or realize the one. And that's only words. That's only, we can't even begin to say what that truly is.
Okay. Thank you.
But that's the place that Swami Vivekananda was speaking from.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
You're more than welcome, Katrina. I am so glad you asked these questions because that's exactly what we should be doing.
Brother
I just-
Shankara,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
when you were saying the knower, is that the same as saying the lower self and the higher self, or are those different terms?
There are two knowers. There is the mind, which is the lower self. That's the limiting way of knowing things by limiting them. I understand this because I know the boundaries of it. I understand what is meant by the periodic table if I know chemistry. But the periodic table is not the fields that pervade the universe that give rise to what appears in the periodic table. Then there is that higher knowledge, which is inexpressible in words. As Christ put it, you will come to that peace which passeth all understanding. You will come to that way of being, that state of being that cannot be put into words or concepts at all, but is, and this is why the Upanishad says that peace comes to that kind of realized being, to none else, to none else. Everyone else, as we sit here this evening, we are in our, though it has many levels, and some of them, as we're enjoying this evening, are quite high, as Dennis put it earlier. We're in the deep end of the pool here. And it's fun to splash about in the deep end of the pool. And to make an attempt to grasp that which is so difficult to grasp, as the Swami says, and that question that can never be finally and satisfactorily answered, because when sufficiently analyzed, it's a non-question. Ultimately, the absolute didn't become anything.
I found a quote that clarified what we were talking about just a few minutes ago with the soul and the body, the transmigration of the soul. He says, the theory then comes to this, that there is a hereditary, sorry, 1 second. Here it is. The theory then comes to this, that there is hereditary transmission so far as furnishing the material to the soul is concerned. But the soul migrates and manufactures body after body, and each thought we think and each deed we do is stored in it in finer forms, ready to spring up again and take a new shape. So what directs the soul when the body dies? The resultant, the sum total of all the works it has done and of the thoughts it has thought. If the resultant is such that it has to manufacture a new body for further experience, it will go to those parents who are ready to supply it with suitable material for that body.
Perfect.
Wow.
Would you like to read that again, please?
Sure. The theory then comes to this, that there is hereditary transmission so far as furnishing the material to the soul is concerned. But the soul migrates and manufactures body after body, and each thought we think and each deed we do is stored in it in fine forms, ready to spring up again and take a new shape. So what directs the soul when the body dies? The resultant, the sum total of all the works it has done, of the thoughts it has thought. If the resultant is such that it has to manufacture a new body for further experience, it will go to those parents who are ready to supply it with suitable material for that body. Thus, from body to body it will go, sometimes to heaven and back to earth, becoming man or some lower animal.
Okay, Katrina, that very much speaks to the question you asked. And that which is in God's image is the soul and not the body and personality. That is the result of the soul creating body after body. And if we want to know more about this creating body after body, it's good to read Sri Krishna in chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita. And just how seriously we should take this. Anything else from anyone?
Yes, Brother Shankara.
Yes, Swayam.
As we are splashing about in the deep end of this pool, so to speak, is there danger of drowning in it? And if so, how do we best safeguard? I mean, one is to make sure that we are, learning from someone such as you, so we don't misunderstand. But um, how do we kind of safeguard from the confusion that's possible that might actually hold us back?
I think all of us who are here this evening are good enough swimmers to be in the deep end of the pool. And the way you can tell someone that deserves your attention from someone who doesn't is how self-interested is that person. What do they want from you? That's how you can tell who you should listen to and who you should not. If all they're asking is your attention, and even that is just simply by invitation, as the prayer we open this with says, may we have the strength and skill to do this together. So there's no danger of drowning as long as you're not swimming with a teacher that has some ulterior motive. Otherwise, you'll do fine.
Thank you, Brother Shankar.
A little after 9 o'clock. Is there anything else, or shall we wrap it up?
Namaste, Brother Shankara.
Yes.
What a wonderful discussion we had. I was listening, and when Chirag asked about this will of moving the chair and the will which Divya was talking about, and then you mentioned prana. That was a perfect. I think it was a very well explanation. What was going on in my mind, you just said that. And my just thought is that it is the prana which does everything. If the prana goes, the mind also goes away.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something which to. And what my experience is that all these truths, what we try to do, like you said, the left hemisphere, we are very much used to use our mind and intellect all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we deal with people, and that's what we are trained, doing everything rather. My experience is that, as we go deeper and deeper into it, if we practice, what happens is the mind and intellect stays behind. And that experience becomes more deeper and deeper. And all little things, which questions we talk about, they get resolved slowly, slowly. It takes time.
Yes.
And, and there are a lot of Eastern philosophers and Western, like Eckhart Tolle is my favorite, Power of Now. And all he says is that you just stay in the present moment and let the mind and body and take care of it. And Nisargadatta Maharaj says the same thing, is that keep the mind and body aside, train yourself constantly. And it's so amazing. And from my own experience, I will say that we have to practice 1 hour, 2 hours of meditation. I know someone in an Indian guru, I recently have started listening to his lectures. He says without meditation, you can only go so much. Without meditation, nothing is possible. And deep meditation, 1 hour, 2 hour meditation, because these are serious things. If you want to progress and really want to know it, then you need to spend time with this. Otherwise, you may spend another 30, 40 years and nothing will happen. And he is very, and so I spend maybe an hour, 2 hours, and maybe in the evening, we have seen enough of the world. I will be for 50 years in few years, a couple of years. And I've seen enough of this, I have realized that I need to be serious. I need to spend time, 2-3 hours of meditation, 1 hour. And Brother Shankar, I remember we used to have this devotee, I forgot his name. He used to follow Nisargadatta, remember? And he was so, and I remember him, he used to meditate so much.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that these are my thoughts, just to share my humble opinion that the more time you spend in meditating, and it's difficult, we have so many duties going around, but it just helps.
Well, you're absolutely right, Shailesh. You're absolutely right that if we wish to make serious progress, we must learn what is in our minds and what is in our active subconscious. And in doing so, it's what Divya was talking about when she said this hereditary material. It's in the form of these fine impressions, mental impressions, samskaras, whatever you want to call them. The only way we come to a grasp of our witness consciousness, the only way we're able to sit in that chair, which is not an aspect of the mind. It watches the mind. It watches everything, as the Swami said. It witnesses everything. And only through the practice of contemplation, prayer, concentration, meditation, do we gain access to that witness consciousness. Then we see that is who we are. That is the face of who we are, this witness. And that everything is happening in that witness's presence. So thank you, Shailesh. You're right.
Thank you.
They're only through the practice of meditation, ultimately, but we start with prayer, contemplation, we move to concentration, and then on to meditation. But each of these stages is so gratifying as we learn to be with the mind in that way. Anything else from anyone? All right. Because it is so badly needed, let us pray together. We all somewhat know this prayer now. Let there be peace in outer space. Let there be peace in the sky, on the earth, and in the waters. Let there be peace in the herbs, the plants, and the trees. May the gods be peaceful. May the whole universe be pervaded by peace. Let this infinite universal peace prevail throughout my being. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace. Peace be unto us and to all beloved beings everywhere. That translation of that ancient prayer was by our beloved Swami Yogeshananda, who just left the body on the 13th of this month. Our, I think this is the first public announcement of this. Our memorial service for him will be at 11 a.m. on Saturday, the 13th of March. Saturday, the 13th of March. The next day is Sri Ramakrishna's birthday celebration. So we're going to have those things together on that weekend. 13th of March, 11 a.m. The next day, and that's the Swami's memorial service. And then our own memorial service here. And then the next day, Aditya Chaturvedi will conduct the birthday celebration and puja for Sri Ramakrishna. Any final thought from anyone? All right, dears. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ki Jai. Durga, Durga, Durga. May you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be cheerful. May you have peace of mind. Go forward in Mother's loving and protective embrace. Until the next time we meet.
Thank you, Brother Shankara.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Brother Shankara. Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Hari Om.
Thank you, Divya.